Hello, good evening. Thank you for attending this CAMS workshop on building self-esteem and resilience on this dark, stormy evening. I appreciate your time. My name's Kirsty Stewart. I'm team lead for IROC CAMS. My team support young people aged 14 to 25 in the East Sussex area, but please don't make this let you think that this isn't going to be relevant for you, because I've put together a presentation, something for all ages, suitable for teens and children. And I suggest to delivering this presentation because I'm passionate about working with young folk. And often at IROC, we're working with young folk who've got low self-esteem, low resilience, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity to share some of my findings. The format of this session is a PowerPoint presentation. It's there to generate some thought around what is self-esteem and resilience, and some interventions in helping build them in our young people. And the terms I'll be using is young people, young folk, and sometimes children. I use it interchangeably. There's no chat function today, as explained earlier, but there is a question and answer function. And also some people have emailed in with questions already that I'll respond to later in the presentation. So I probably won't be able to cover everything for you today. There's so many schools of thought and no definitive answers, but I hope to give a broad view of the subject. And this is one of many parent workshops, so please do have a look at the others uploaded onto the CAMS website. They're ready to watch and they're really fabulous. And there'll be a slide at the end of this presentation with some of the links, and I think it'll be put in the chat as well. So as Mel explained, I'm a mental health nurse, but I'm also a mother, and I love speaking to and working with young folk. And just to say, I know that I haven't always got it right. You know, I'm human, and sometimes I've slipped into some learned styles of parenting that hasn't always been helpful. So I'm just saying that because I don't want you to take any of this away as criticism. It's not my intention. I know that some of what I talk about, you're already putting in practice. Some of the things you might have let slip. We're all human, totally understandable. And there may be some new things to learn. I know it's a difficult time when you're a young person struggling, and we can be left feeling so helpless and hopeless in the situation that faces them. And so I want you to take care of yourself this evening. And if you need to step away, please do. And like Mel said, these are being recorded. You can catch up later. But I hope today will give you some confidence and some belief in your own resilience, and some techniques to help you with your self-esteem in turn to help them with theirs. So first of all, I'd like you to think about, what do we mean by self-esteem? So we've got an Oxford Dictionary definition here. And I think just on the next slide, we can just see someone with good self-esteem, a young person, and it's how we value and perceive ourselves. It's based on our opinions, and beliefs about ourselves, which can feel difficult to change. We might also think of this as self-confidence. So your self-esteem can affect whether you like and value yourself as a person, can make decisions and assert yourself, recognize your strengths, feel able to try new or difficult things, show kindness towards yourself, move past mistakes without blaming yourself unfairly, take the time you need for yourself, believe you matter and are good enough, and believe that you deserve happiness. I had a little look into the research, and it says that from ages of 4 to 8, that children actually experience a loss of self-esteem as they realise that their real self is different from their ideal self, so their imagined self. And then self-esteem begins to increase very quickly after 15, perhaps because of adolescence increasing in greater personal autonomy. And then it increases quickly up to age 30, and then more gradually till up to age 60. And then peaks somewhere between 60 and 70, and then begins dropping quite quickly after the age of 90. I think that feels quite positive. So I want you to think about what's meant by good self-esteem. And this is having a generally positive image of yourself, believing that you matter, feeling confident about your strengths, feeling proud of your achievements, not feeling too worried, upset about things that you can't do well, believing that you've got good things to offer other people. So believing that you're kind, good, or an interesting friend, believing your opinions and views matter and that you're worth hearing, feeling able to try new things or give something a go, having a kind and understanding inner voice when things go wrong, being kind to yourself when you're having a hard time, including keeping up with self-care, giving yourself a break, feeling positive or comfortable most of the time, about your body and how it looks. So having good self-esteem is not about being happy all the time or always feeling confident. We all have bad days, negative thoughts, but when we have good self-esteem, we're more able to move on from these feelings by being kind to ourselves and asking for support. And I'm thinking this is the aim that we have for ourselves and for our young people. So what does low self-esteem look like? Well, having a more negative image of yourself, feeling that you're bad, you're ugly, you're unlikable, you're stupid, having a lack of confidence in your qualities and strengths, or feeling that you're not good enough, finding it difficult to feel proud of things, or feeling like you should have done better, having more of a negative inner voice with the shoulds and the telling yourself that you should not and that you have made a mistake, feeling more cautious about doing new things or giving something a go, putting yourself down by saying I'm stupid or I can't do that, comparing yourself to others in a negative way, what we call compare and despair, feeling negative or uncomfortable about your body and how it looks, and doubting whether you're worthy and deserving of being valued, listened to, loved or cared for. And I know I've had thoughts like this. I'm sure many of us have, and quite often. I'm just thinking about how many of these thoughts came up when I've initially agreed to do this workshop. I think it's useful to bring an analogy up now. I love an analogy. So just thinking about self-esteem, good self-esteem, as being like a helium balloon. So you know helium balloons, floating in the air, bobbling around, excited, used at parties. Well, eventually the helium wears off and the balloon will eventually fall to the ground, shrivel, and that's it. Maybe it's been affected by the temperature. Maybe it's got a hole in it. Our self-esteem is very similar to that balloon. In order for us to have a positive outlook and a general positive mood, we've got to find ways to constantly keep our balloon afloat. And the same for our children and young people. And when we are self-critical and negative, we are depleting and essentially poking holes in our balloon, causing it to slowly lose air and eventually descend. I had a look at the Good Childhood Report of 2023, so hot off the press, and I've put the link further down in the presentation. They're saying that almost a third of the children aged 10 to 17 who completed the survey for this year were unhappy with at least one of the 10 specific areas of their lives that they asked about. With family being 19%, appearance 14.6%, friends 11%, schoolwork 9.8%, and school 9.2%. So we can see the kind of loading of stress and worries that our young people are carrying with them. So I've put these on scales, and you can see when the scales get weighed down with stress, falling out with friends, test at school, bereavement, the weight gets heavier and heavier. And we know that young people with self-esteem have then developed internal thoughts about not being good enough, that others are better than them. And they have that stream of thoughts that then keep them feeling low and subsequently developing unhelpful coping strategies. I've written some down there: procrastination, aggression, self-harm, social withdrawal, overeating or undereating, sleeping too much or sleeping too little, alcohol, substance misuse, smoking, and now vaping. I'm not going to go into detail with these because Yes, we've got webinars on them. We've got parent workshops on them, and they are on the website. And if you follow the link, there's, a workshop on each of, not on each of these, but on most of these. Anyhow, as we were saying, once down, it's hard to get back up, especially without that idea of the helium high self-esteem balloon to take some of the weight. And these unhelpful habits are used for short-term relief. Totally understandable. Get rid of uncomfortable feelings in the moment. However, more than often, they're not helpful in the medium term or the long term. They become negative outcomes and can become risk factors. So we need to help our young children, our young people, develop positive self-esteem in order to inoculate against life struggles. Now let's move on to resilience. Let's think about what resilience is. Here's a dictionary definition, and you can see it's got a technical definition of the ability of a substance or an object to spring back into shape, that sort of elasticity. So resilience is handling different types of stress, and then recovering. It's the process of adapting in the face of adversity. I used the next slide to illustrate resilience because I think young people and parents have had to be so resilient through COVID, lockdowns, all the stuff that's happened in the last few years. There's been some research, of course, and it's saying that over the last 2 years, so 2 years ago, they're finding that 1 in 9 children and young people were affected by mental health conditions. But by October 2020, 8 months since the virus first reached the UK, the figure had risen to 1 in 6. And we're seeing this now, aren't we? We're seeing this kind of tsunami of a wave of young people who have suffered as a result. High levels of loneliness, disrupted sleep, anxiety, social anxiety, fear about leaving the house. Yeah. So in thinking about resilience, I'd like you to watch this YouTube video now. And again, the link will be available for you later.
Resilience is the result of a highly interactive process between individual characteristics in the person and the environment in which that individual has developed.
It's really the counterbalancing of difficult things that may exist in the child's life with positive things that occur within the family, but even positive things that may exist in the community.
An easy way of thinking about resilience is like a scale with a fulcrum in the middle of it. And there are things on both sides of that scale, experiences of both bad things or good things.
Our genes shape where the fulcrum is positioned at the start.
There are certain genes that make a child more sensitive to the effects of maltreatment or parental neglect or witnessing violence.
The fulcrum may start out kind of more towards one side or more towards the other side, and that's going to make a big difference in terms of how much these subsequent events affect things positively or negatively.
Science tells us that experience moves the fulcrum, for better or for worse.
Even though we are born with genes, genes will respond differently to certain environmental situations as opposed to others.
What the genes are actually doing are turning up or turning down the expression of chemicals in circuits in the brain and the circuitry in the entire body that govern our responses to stress, to anxiety, to depressive symptoms.
When positive experiences accumulate and children learn coping skills that help them to manage stress, the fulcrum can slide, so the scale tilts toward positive outcomes more easily. That's what resilience is all about.
There's always an adult, or more than one adult, who is key to providing that relationship that helps to build resilience.
So to summarise, in moving the fulcrum closer to one end, increases the mechanical advantage and increases the force on the load, meaning it takes less for the scales to drop to that end. So what causes the fulcrum to move along? Well, we heard there from Dr. Boyce. He was one of the MDs speaking there. And in his book, The Orchid and Dandelion, Dr. Boyce explains how he studied many children in his role as child psychologist, 40-year career. He reports that most young people are what he calls dandelions. So these are young people that, like a dandelion, will grow wherever they're seeded, you know, a crack in the path or in the garden. And this is a child who thrives no matter what their life's like, what their parents are like, they'll just do fine. And then there's a subset of young people in his research who, like the orchid on my kitchen windowsill, needs a particular environment in order to thrive. He named them orchid children, as an orchid's a particular type of plant that needs a certain set of needs, has a certain set of needs. Orchids are in no way failed dandelions. They are their own unique kind of child, and they've got unique abilities and a unique profile. And they've got capacity with the right type of circumstances to strive and become quite accomplished, striking and successful in their own orchidness. More so than a dandelion, you might say. Orchid children is his term to describe young people who are sensitive. They don't respond to just any type of praise, just any type of discipline. Their need is for interactions to be tailored to their physiology, their neurology, and their specific profile. And I just wonder if you just spend a minute and reflect on that, thinking about your own child and what are the special environmental circumstances that they need to grow and thrive and be their beautiful self. Poppy, thank you.
Growing up, we're all flower children. Not the hippy-dippy kind. Scientists measured brain activity, and they found some kids are dandelions, and about 1 in 5 are orchids. Dandelions are naturally resilient, like their namesake. Nothing gets them down for that long. They bounce back, seemingly stronger. Orchid children are sensitive. They find comfort in routine, and they have a negative reaction to change. They're often picky eaters. They tend to be introverts. They need nurturing and special care, like an orchid, and they have the best or worst outcomes. They're also more susceptible to depression and anxiety. That pattern alone is interesting, but what's going on inside an orchid child is even more intriguing, specifically what's happening inside the ear. Research shows that orchid kids have a higher temperature in their right inner ear than other kids. It's usually higher on the left. This apparently is because of an active prefrontal cortex, which is immediately behind the forehead. Here's the brain-blood emotional connection in all this. The right eardrum and the brain's right cerebral prefrontal cortex use the same blood supply. More blood is flowing into the right prefrontal cortex in orchid children, sending oxygen to the neurons that are working hard to regulate emotions in that region. Scientists believe the higher ear temp indicates more activity. Remember, the higher rates of anxiety and depression, all emotionally related. Their actual perception of the world and processing it emotionally are often different. Was that finding just a fluke? Nope. Professors also inspected a group of monkeys and found the same thing. Monkeys that were more prone to stress and sensitivity, they had right ears with higher temperatures. With natural differences in disposition in mind, dandelions and orchids, they both need love and support. The main difference from a parenting perspective is the degree and type of support each needs. Sometimes an orchid needs protection. Sometimes they need a prod to take a risk, learn a lesson. And it's the same for dandelions. There are differences in kids, but the universal truth is a rich, loving environment with attentive caregivers is the best place to bloom.
In his book, Boyce talks about how our genes shape whether we've got an orchid or a dandelion child, and it's not an either or. There's, of course, a spectrum. So the orchid child is predisposed to be less resilient, and I just wanted to introduce that research to you, as I think it's useful when we think about our young people. And at IROC, my team are regularly supporting young people who are more sensitive to criticism, more sensitive to their environment, to smells, noises, crowds, people, and then in turn we see how it affects their self-esteem. Now, if we apply this to the scales, the orchid child and the dandelion child being the two extremes of where the fulcrum's set, the orchid child, the scales are unbalanced in favour of low self-esteem, low mood, anxiety. And I want to add that this isn't a good bad scenario, because as orchid children, as Dr. Boyce said, the orchid child is the child that shows great sensitivity and susceptibility to both good and bad environments in which he or she finds herself. And so with an orchid child, you're going to have often an intuitive and a creative child. So experiences also move the fulcrum for better or worse. And I want to introduce this concept to you of adverse childhood experiences. There have been advances in research regarding the prevalence of adverse childhood experiences. They're saying that there are poor outcomes for children who have experienced these before age 18. The exposure to adverse childhood experiences has been connected with reduced academic performance, reduced health outcomes, increased prevalence in certain health conditions. And what do we mean by adverse childhood experiences? Well, as you can see, we mean physical abuse, any intentional act that causes physical harm; emotional abuse, any intentional act that causes psychological harm; sexual abuse, any forceful, unwanted, otherwise abusive sexual behaviour; physical neglect, failure to help meet the basic biological needs of a child, such as food, water, shelter; emotional neglect, failure to help meet the basic emotional needs of a child, such as attention and affection; and witnessing domestic abuse, observing violence between two individuals in a domestic setting, parents or family members; witnessing drug or alcohol abuse, having a close family member who's misused them; mental health problems, having a close family member or otherwise important individual with mental health problems; parental separation or divorce, parents or guardians separating on account of a relationship breakdown; and imprisonment, having a close family member or otherwise important individual serve time in prison. And this ACE, Adverse Childhood Experience Study, has been replicated internationally, and national studies here in England and Wales have found that almost half, so 46% of the adult population in England has had at least one ACE, whilst 8% have had 4 or more. But please know that as a community, we can support to prevent the impact of adverse childhood experiences. We have opportunities for mentorship, school engagement, and strengthening support in communities for the whole family. There's a slide next, but I'm not going to play the video. It'll be further down in my presentation, and just have a look at that link later. And as that's a bit of a heavy topic, maybe now's a good time to take a break, take a breath, make a brew. See you in 10 minutes. So that's 7:44. Thanks, bye. So there's been a question that's come through asking if the orchid and the dandelion links to additional needs or autistic spectrum condition. And really, while many highly sensitive children might have neurodivergence, such as autism or ADHD, being highly sensitive isn't the equivalent of having these conditions. So it's possible for people to be highly sensitive, be an Orchid child, without having neurodiversity. But obviously, there's often an overlap as well, where ADHD and autistic young people and children are more likely to have a heightened sensitivity, but not everyone with a heightened sensitivity is necessarily neurodivergent. I hope that answers that for you. Okay, moving on. Next slide. So if adults are key to help building resilience and self-esteem, how can we do this? So because I'm a mental health nurse, I've used Maslow's hierarchy of needs to order and think about the different ways that we can help our young people achieve self-esteem and resilience. So you can see here Maslow's hierarchy of needs consists of 5 key necessities: physiological, safety, love, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. So I'm going to go through each of these, thinking about different interventions, different things that we can be doing with our young folk. Excuse me. So physiological needs. So these are about having the right nutrition, water, access to fresh air, enough rest and exercise. And we know without these things that our children don't thrive. They appreciate routine, they appreciate exercise. It's just a human given, isn't it? The safety needs are both physical and emotional, and right from the get-go, it's a tightrope between protection and encouragement from the moment they start to move away from us. And I don't know about you, but I've often found a struggle in finding a balance between independence and safety for my child. We know that children need freedom to try things out on their own, even though they might make mistakes or get hurt. And we also know that we don't have the power to create a risk-free world for our children. And if we do, we risk harming them. So there's times where we have to say yes, and it's easy to say no without really thinking about the request. So giving our young folks some freedom to make choices about the negotiables, letting them take reasonable risks, giving them a chance to make their own choices and mistakes as often as possible. We learn through both successes and our failures. And if you show your young people that you love them by giving them the opportunity to experience both with you and with you as their safety net. Also, we need to say no. So loving someone isn't about saying yes and no indiscriminately, but with careful thought and balance. Teens morphing into adults, but they still need boundaries. Provide them with love. Talk to your teen about the boundaries that you set and give them the space to respectfully question them. Sometimes understanding why helps them see that your number one goal isn't to ruin their lives. And remembering that they're still our children. As they grow up, they might start to look like adults and face adult decisions, but our teens aren't adults yet. And we need to keep that in mind when they make foolish mistakes, need our reassurance, act silly, act immature. Love and belongingness needs. There's this lovely term, caritas, meaning attentiveness and steadfast love in Latin. And we need to find ways to show love. So listening to them when they talk to you, really listening is really important, not just nodding along. It's important to hear what they're saying as well as what they're not saying. And I can remember times where I've had to dig deep to listen to the latest anime storyline after a hard day's work, but it's been appreciated. And keep in mind that some conversations are hard for teens. Those talks happen more easily shoulder to shoulder rather than eye to eye. So that's engaging in something that holds your visual focus whilst talking, such as going for a walk or a drive or working on a project together, even watching TV programs together. And whilst some conversations need to be shoulder to shoulder, there's also the times where you need to look at them. I can remember times where my daughter said don't worry, it doesn't matter, or never mind, when she's picked up on my poor body language and it's been clear to her that I've not been focused on her. So they need to, at times, they need for us to look at them so that they know that they're important, that we've made time for them and what they have to say matters. And these moments can happen at any time and anywhere, but also maybe put aside some one-to-one time. Talking, spending time talking to them about your day. Again, I'm guilty of just walking in the door and calling up the stairs, not actually going and seeing and talking to. It's good to tell them what's going on in your life, not all of it, but if you can select certain scenarios to let them know that you're human and that you're struggling too. And you might be surprised at what insight your child might give you and how they might problem solve, seeing a solution that maybe you hadn't considered. Showing them love no matter what, telling them and showing that you love them. They still need to hear the words, I love you. No one ever outgrows that. And we can create a sense of self-worth under our children, knowing that they're beautiful human beings, even when they muck up. So they know that they're worthy of love, letting them know what a good friend, sister, brother they are, letting your actions show them that you love them, leaving them a note. I love it when people leave notes in the lunchbox, ruffle their hair or pat the shoulder as you walk past, make their favourite meals. Some young folks still need physical attention, maybe not in front of their friends, as I've learned, but hugs show you them that you love them, but also they can help reduce stress, and they're known to provide a variety of health benefits. Some young folk can't bear a hug, so what's your alternative? A high five, a fist pump, yeah, a show of affection on their terms, and acts of service from time to time. And self-esteem needs, where someone needs to affirm the child's worth and that the child's given the opportunities to achieve, to make choices and be successful. Spending time with them, as said, finding out what makes your young person tick and being involved in that, but also giving them space. As much as they need time with us, sometimes they need time by themselves to think, to read, to play, to listen to music or whatever. My daughter definitely needed time to unwind after school. It might look like mindless scrolling or gaming, but appreciate that sometimes this is their way that they found to decompress. So make sure that they've got somewhere they can go to be alone when they need to. And if you have siblings that share a bedroom, you might need to get creative with other spaces in your home and put some ground rules in place for allow each of them to have quiet time. And there's something here as well about giving them responsibilities, because we just want to protect our children and at times do everything for them. And I know I'm guilty of this, that we do our young people a disservice when we don't give them responsibilities. Expect their help not as a favour to mum or dad or for money, but as an integral part of family life. And this is what makes the household run. We can help boost their self-esteem by giving them challenges, giving them an opportunity to take something on, particular chores, give them a task that they can handle. Do they have the ability to do that? And they probably don't want to do it. But self-esteem, interestingly, is tied to seeing ourselves taking on challenges, not necessarily us succeeding in them, but actually to see us try and not to avoid, because when you avoid a challenge, that's when your self-esteem takes a hit. And self-actualization is the need for achievement, independence, self-respect, and respect from others. And this is letting people suffer the consequences. It's a hard one, but if a poor choice has been made, it's not easy to watch, but we can't go in and rescue. Don't fall into the trap of thinking you're a terrible parent if you don't bail them out every time they make a mistake. They need to learn from their mistakes. So let them do it again. Don't rescue them. Respect their struggle and share in the joy when they succeed. And with respecting their struggles, sometimes what seems like a very minuscule in the big scheme of things of what we're dealing with as adults, but you know how important their friendships are and their friendship groups, or not having friends is. And it seems to kind of grow in teenage years where those relationships are devastating when there's a fallout. And these struggles are genuine and they're real, and they're as real to them as our adult struggles are for us. So we need to respect what they're going through, be their sounding board, offer guidance, recognizing as well that sometimes you just need to simply listen, and we're helping prepare them for the adult world. So I chose this slide because, well, what I really wanted was lots of chaos behind, and a parent really trying to ground themselves, because I want to talk to you a bit about self-regulation, how important it is not to react in high reaction situations, keeping ourselves calm as we are working with building our young people's self-esteem and resilience. So, as discussed earlier, our young people can be easily reactive. If they're an orchid child, if their hormones are raging, if they've had a fight with friends, we see them go into states of fight and flight very quickly. And fight and flight feelings create fight and flight thoughts and behaviours, and often rational thinking is out the window. Here's a video that explains more.
Humans, like all species, have self-protective mechanisms to help us survive. Our fight, flight or freeze survival response, the FFF for short, is designed to mobilize our brain and body to fight an enemy, run from an avalanche, or freeze to hide from a predator. Our brain sometimes misinterprets safe situations as dangerous and can set off false alarms. When the amygdala, our brain's watchdog, senses and barks danger, our body enters survival mode quicker than our rational mind can react, leaving it trying to figure out why we feel in mortal danger. When the FFF alarm is sounded, we start to breathe more quickly and shallow, causing hyperventilation, and our heart starts beating very fast. These changes can cause strong chest pain, which many people interpret as symptoms of a heart attack, when in fact it's just a result of the FFF activation, which can be relieved through breathing exercises. As a way of getting you ready for action, blood is diverted towards the major muscle groups. Blood flows away from our digestive system, causing the bladder to relax, and we might feel the need to pee. The mouth goes dry, nausea can occur, and we get the butterflies feeling in our stomach. Blood also rushes from extremities, leaving us with cold hands, but often sweaty palms as the action-ready body starts sweating to avoid overheating. Legs and hands can start trembling and feel weak, while tension starts building in big muscles like the thighs, neck, and shoulders. In our head, FFF alarms cause our brain to focus on negative memories, probably so it can scan them to avoid danger and negative outcomes. We get tunnel vision as our pupils dilate to increase our focus and long vision, but as a result we lose our peripheral vision. FFF activation also reduces our ability to recognize differences in facial expressions. Too much oxygen and too little CO2 can result in dizziness or lightheadedness, which many people interpret as signs that they might faint. But because fainting is caused by a drastic drop in blood pressure, and because the FFF increases both our heart rate and blood pressure, it's nearly impossible to faint when this happens. Over time, depression, anxiety, and high levels of stress all harm the brain's ability to slow or cancel false FFF activations, causing them to happen more often. Knowing the symptoms of false activations makes it easier to recognize and reduce their effects. At Tanky Boxing, you can learn both bottom
So the fight, flight, and freeze feelings create fight, fight, and freeze thoughts and behaviours. Rational thoughts often out the window. So grounding techniques is the way to help yourself or your child get back into the present and bring their body back into a normal state so you can work through whatever's triggered the response. In the video, it mentioned about deep breathing exercises, and there's many of them on the web that can be used to help anybody get out of fight and flight. Breathing deeply into the lungs slows down the heart rate, signals to the body there is no threat, and the parasympathetic nervous system can return to a normal state. Now, it's a good idea to try out, have a little look, see what exercises your child responds well to before they're in a heightened state of anxiety, fight, flight, and freeze, and reminding them to do this when they become activated. It's also useful to coach them through it by breathing with them. One that I often use is starfish breathing. So I can't do it as I talk, but this idea that you breathe in as you come up to the top of your hand, breathe out, your finger, sorry, breathing in for the next finger, breathing out. Sometimes people like this because it's very anchoring because of the physical nature of it. You'll be able to find these on the web, but also I've lined up another quick video that you can look at and breathe along with me. Just nice and easy, and I don't know about you, but I just feel my anxiety just gone down a percentage after that. Another great grounding technique is the sensory techniques that can be really useful if you'd like to watch this video with me as well.
This technique will take you through your 5 senses to help remind you of the present. This is a calming technique that can help you get through tough or stressful situations. Take a deep belly breath to begin. Number 5. Look around for 5 things that you can see and say them out loud. For example, you could say, I see a burger. I see a bird. I see a soccer ball. Number 4, feel. Pay attention to your body and think of 4 things that you can feel and say them out loud. For example, you could say, I feel my feet warm in my socks. I feel the hair on the back of my neck. Or I feel the pillow I'm sitting on. Number 3, listen. Listen for 3 sounds. Say the things out loud. It could be the sound of running feet, an airplane flying by, or the sound of a dog barking. Number 2, smell. Say 2 things you can smell. It's okay to move to another spot and sniff something. If you can't smell anything at the moment, or you can't move, then name 2 of your favorite smells. Number 1, taste. Say 1 thing you can taste. It may be the toothpaste from brushing your teeth, or the flavor of your bubblegum. If you can't taste anything, then say your favorite thing to taste. Take another deep belly breath to end.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt that video, but my internet's a bit unstable, I think. I didn't hear all of that, but I know what it's saying. And this grounding technique can be repeated as many times as needed to calm the nervous system. Also, music. Music can help a child become more grounded. Music through the headphones, or on the radio, listening to music, helping people feel more calmer and more in control. Sometimes it's got a good vibe attached to it, memories, or sometimes it's just music that takes you to another place. Or sometimes maybe singing a song together, a favourite song. And then also you've got the added bonus of breathing deeper with that. Any music that your child likes can help with grounding. And it can be useful to find that music ahead of time and have that in a kind of bit of a first aid kit. So that's one of the things that you go for when you need a calming effect on the mind. I put in the link later on some research from the Sound of the Next Generation about the impact of music and young people. It's such a powerful contributor to their well-being. It's not just listening, but also creating music to encourage different emotional states, form communities, help people feel understood. And then, interestingly enough, some research there about heavy music. It can sometimes be more cathartic than light music. So that's interesting. Of course, physical exercise. The fear response can come from various physical symptoms, as we saw, the fight, flight and freeze response, rushes of adrenaline, muscle tension. So exercise is a logical antidote to that. Getting out in the fresh air for a short walk can be an ideal grounding exercise as well. You could do a mindful walk where you're noticing things, noticing that bird, noticing that tree. So you're bringing in that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 as well. And if you can't get out and about, star jumps, putting on some music, having a bounce around, just trying something to change the physiological state that's been happening. And use these on yourself to keep yourself regulated and managing your emotions. Be that role model of self-regulation as well as self-esteem and resilience, because sometimes our young folk can seem so fragile and it creates our own anxiety, and we can have a behavioural response to that where we become overprotective or become really anxious ourselves. And it's quite often in IROC I'll hear someone say, when I ask about if they're sharing stuff with their parents, they say they don't want to, they don't want to worry them, they're already anxious. So I think keep yourself okay is so important. Take time to look after yourself, be kind to yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup. And as highlighted, self-esteem ebbs and flows throughout life. Many parents find that their self-esteem takes a dive when they've had children. It just feels a bit shameful to talk about this, but of course, you know, all the things that we've done throughout our lives to make ourselves happy, and when we're independent, children naturally make huge demands on us, on our time, and it's hard for us sometimes to get a sense of achievement, and difficult for us to look after our needs. But we can continually make steps towards improving our self-esteem, and it's important that we do. Self-esteem affects our children. It could be a huge influence on a child's mindset. How we talk about ourselves and to ourselves is also an important influence on our children's self-esteem. You know, when you're looking in the mirror, make sure you're not giving yourself any negative feedback, because you know we're going to be watched and probably mimicked as well. Adults that have good self-esteem have been often been raised in environments that are full of high praise. When we become parents, it's so much more natural for us then to provide the warmth and positive reinforcement that we've learned. But of course, we've not all had that upbringing. Those of us who have heard a lot of criticism may have a tendency to be self-critical and to set impossibly high standards for ourselves and maybe even our children. I've had to point out to my daughter a few times, well, not point out, but, you know, apologise and say, I've got it wrong. How could I have done better? And so unless we make a conscious effort, it becomes so easy to repeat negative patterns from our own upbringing. So there's lots of things we can do to boost our self-esteem, boast our self-esteem as well. And here are a few ideas. So focus on the positives. And this is, again, that kind of cognitive. This is about our thoughts. It's easy to slip into the habit of noticing what we haven't done and what we should have done. And when we focus on the failures, we can get these out of proportion in our mind's eye. One simple thing that we can do to boost our own self-esteem is to invite ourselves to write a gratitude list. At the end of the day, take a minute to think back on the successes and the things that we're grateful for, those moments that happened in the day, positive moments, rather than dwelling on the things that didn't happen on time or you didn't manage to do. Focus on the positives. And with that, have realistic expectations. Could it be that you're setting the bar impossibly high for yourself? When we've got limited time with our children, we can feel a lot of pressure of family time to be perfect, argument-free, have, I don't know, all the vegetables, all the toys, who knows? But if that's unrealistic, parenting inevitably involves setting boundaries for our children and managing conflict. It can get messy. And when we set unrealistic expectations for ourselves or our families, we can often end up blaming ourselves. The day didn't go how we wanted it to, no matter how much we planned, and that drags our self-esteem down. So we need to capture those blaming thoughts. So try and take away the shoulds, the should not have, the musts, and instead use softer language like, it'll be really good if we could do that sometimes, or I'd like to do that a bit more often. Encourage yourself for what you're getting right and give yourself some credit. And self-care matters. And we've all got a huge to-do list to do. And self-care always seems to be at the bottom. But it's important to take time for yourself. Dig out those bath bombs that you were bought last Christmas. Stick them in the bath. Small acts of self-care send a big signal to ourselves that we're worth it. Have that chocolate. If we can't fit it in big acts of self-care, just try little acts. And don't compare yourself to others, especially not to the images that we see on social media. And we could spend a whole other hour talking about social media and the impact on self-esteem and resilience, couldn't we? Nobody's life's perfect. It's a well-edited presentation of what people want you to see. It's not reality. And I think it's really important to have those conversations with your young people and share about the pressure that you feel as well with social media. And reach out, because if you feel that your self-esteem really is having a negative effect on your parenting, there is help for you. Off the top of my head, Health in Mind, they have a self-esteem group. There's loads of resources on the internet as well. But don't forget as well the power of friends and family. It's you could always share with them about how you're feeling. But just remember, if you're aiming for perfection, you will always feel like a failure. What children need, they don't need perfection role modeled. What they need is good enough role model. So celebrate your successes, forgive yourself your mistakes, and be kind to yourself. So up until this point today, we've had some opportunity to email in questions. So I've got some questions here that I'm now going to go through and respond to. So someone's asking, what's the best way to respond to my child talking negatively about themselves? My 8-year-old says she hates herself and calls herself stupid, and I wanted to know how best to respond when she's talking about herself in this way. And that's really heartbreaking, isn't it? It's heartbreaking to hear your child putting themselves down like that. And it's definitely, and you can feel the physical response to it, it's definitely something not to be ignored. And like we were saying earlier, self-talk can become habitual and can create outcomes of behaviour. Excuse me. There's something in this about embracing the emotions your child shows so that they feel fully heard. So the listening, the looking, being with, attentively listening, not necessarily agreeing, but really hearing that she's down on herself. And I think it's worth exploring why, because I think I'm hearing a kind of all or nothing statement. Feels like always stupid, or, you know, everything's always bad. I just I can't really think of it doesn't really say, does it? But I'm just getting that sense of black and white thinking. So I think by looking at specifics and exploring why they're feeling like this, and just thinking about times as well when exploring times when they have felt clever, brave, strong, resilient, maybe sharing your own times of when you felt like that yourself. I think tools in the toolkit, conversations to have when they're feeling okay, thinking about how thoughts are not facts. Moving on, my son uses strong language like I'm the worst, recently escalating to I hate myself when being told off for minor things. It seems to be a form of remorse, and he doesn't fully understand how strong the words he's using are. How do I respond when he uses such words to try and stop his feelings deepening? And again, really emotional when you see your otherwise bright, happy child escalating into these states, becoming verbally and sometimes physically aggressive. Anger's part of the fight, flight and freeze response, and it will be really difficult to rationalize with someone when they're in that state. I'd be interested to know what's happening under the surface. So I'm thinking about a kind of iceberg analogy, really, where we see rage and upset above the deep waters, and what's lurking underneath. You know, sometimes there's emotions of fear and overwhelm and insecurity and disappointment. So again, I feel like emotion regulation's the key. You think about the times when maybe you've flown off the handle and then you've regretted what you've said afterwards. If we can calm ourselves before we get to that boiling point, then we won't need to feel remorseful afterwards. And I think there's something as well about we don't need to accept all of children's behaviour, and they're not happy when they're trying to overpower us or when they shout at us. And we don't need to be tiptoeing around them, avoiding the limits that might upset them. We need to keep those boundaries in place to keep everyone safe. And they need for us to accept and care about all their feelings, good and bad, whether they're happy or sad. It's what allows them to feel safe and secure. So again, it's that balance, isn't it? And role modeling, care and compassion is what enables them to then care for other people's feelings. But it feels like putting some things in place whilst, if we think about a boiling pot spilling over with rage, put some things in place while the pot is cold, so that you've got some resources for when they're starting to build in emotion. Okay. Someone here saying that they've heard a heartbreaking statistic that by the age of 10, an ADHD child has received 20,000 more pieces of negative feedback than one without. How do we give feedback and remind of the appropriate behaviour or stop them doing things without it becoming another piece of negative feedback? Well, that is a sad statistic, isn't it? So over the course of 10 years, that's more than 5 negative comments per day, more than young people without ADHD. And it just feels like often our children are square pegs in round holes in the learning environment and sometimes in society. And you can see how it leads to misunderstandings and expectations that can't be met. So often young people with ADHD, like with the Orchid children, do have trouble regulating, including emotions, like if there's any sort of punishments or name calling or negative comments or feedback, it just seems to hurt even more and be internalized even more. And so this idea of building up self-esteem under them, letting them know that they're loved and appreciated for their uniqueness, I think is a real powerful antidote to the negative feedback they're given. Just thinking about those scales and how we can weight the scales with positive reinforcers. Okay, moving on. It's really difficult speaking in a workshop and not getting any feedback. So I hope that the answers are suitable and adequate. I know my son receives a lot from his siblings as they get frustrated with his constant moving and making noises. How can they communicate with him better too? And again, I'm wondering if sharing some of the uniqueness and the joy in his uniqueness might create some tolerance to his uniqueness as well. And I'm just imagining these young children, these siblings for your son are going to be more sensitive, more centered, knowledgeable and mature for having this experience with their sibling. But it's going to take time. They'll still need their one-to-one time with you. And then I'm just thinking, have you contacted Sendias, Amaze, and asked for support? Because sibling support is really important, as support is for you. Next question. I have a child who constantly worries about getting worries or things that might happen, which most of the time don't. We've tried writing worries down and looking back at them. We've used a worry monster, but these don't stop her gut feelings or being a child that worries. She'll often say, I don't want to feel like this all the time. And the second issue is that she gets tearful very easily, often, if something's made her cross to embarrass her. How does she learn to overcome this as she then gets frustrated? She hasn't cried in class and feels people will think she's a baby. Or she has cried in class and people think she's a baby when it's not upset, it's just frustrated her. So I thought there were two parts to this question. Number one, worry. So worry isn't all bad, you know, strategizing and thinking what if can be a good thing, but it's as long as it doesn't last too long, become too intense, happen too often. If you feel it's got to this stage, despite your interventions, and I can see you've been really thinking about it and researching it, and you've got these things that you're trying out, I'm thinking maybe you need to look for some extra support. The mental health support team offers 7 to 17-year-olds a range of mental health needs, anxiety, phobia, negative thought patterns, low mood, sleep. They see people one-to-one or in small groups. I think that might be worth exploring. And then the second bit to it, tears. I think tears are nature, well, they are nature's way of us regulating. I'm sure you felt that yourself. You have a cry and it feels better. I guess your daughter's looking for other techniques that might work in the moment before she gets to the point of tears. So again, emotion regulation, setting up a toolkit, thinking about what the things she might be able to use when she can feel herself starting to get emotional. Okay. I have a child who's, next question, I've got a child who's got low self-esteem and we're starting the screening process for ADHD and ASD. I'm mindful of understanding how people react is a huge concern for him at the moment. For example, if someone tells him off, he genuinely thinks that person doesn't like him. Or if he's playing again with his friends and someone changes the rules and everyone stops playing, He thinks he doesn't have friends and those playing with him don't want to, and he feels it's because of him. How do we support this and encourage him to understand that's not the case? Well, I was in my office at IROC when I received this email, and I just happened to ask the peer support workers at IROC, and two of them just said in unison, Google rejection sensitivity and ADHD. So it's a term that I'd heard of but didn't know that much about, and I went online and nearly fell down a rabbit hole. So William Dodson coined the phrase rejection sensitivity, stating it's a triggered, wordless, emotional pain that occurs after a real or perceived loss of approval, love, or respect. So again, I think looking at emotion regulation to help combat the physical chain reaction brought about from perceived rejection would be good. And also, yeah, go and have a look at rejection sensitivity. It's not a diagnosis, but it really sounds like it would be useful for you if you don't already know of it. So thank you for listening to my voice for so long today. I'd really like to receive some feedback on how my presentation's been, and as a collective, we're looking for feedback on how you found today's sessions and the other sessions, and whether you will be using any of the interventions described today. So again, thank you, and I wish you all a good evening.